I was pretending to be something I was not. But when I transitioned years later, that all shifted. It totally shifted. And I think I was a better team player and manager and leader once I was aware of and could be myself.
Welcome to AGN Studios and back to the Badass Leaders podcast. Today's guest is an expert in innovation, resilience, and leadership. Cathleen Quigley is a trailblazing broadband system architect, expert witness, and LGBTQIA+ advocate with a career over 3 decades at cutting-edge technology. She's named inventor on over 100 U.S. patents, a Broadcom fellow, and was inducted as a cable TV pioneer in 2019. Recently, she and her Broadcom team also received the National Academy of Television Arts and Sciences Technology and Engineering Emmy Award for pioneering technologies enabling high-performance communication over cable TV systems. I got to hold the Emmy. Oh man, I would never be able to hold an Emmy again. It was so amazing. Thank you, Cathleen, for sharing that with me. So Cathleen is the founder and president of Swiftwater Consulting, where she advises top legal, semiconductor, and telecom companies on complex tech strategy and intellectual property. But beyond the technical accolades, she brings a uniquely human perspective. As a trans woman, Cathleen has not only broken barriers in boardrooms and labs, she's helped redefine what courageous, authentic leadership truly looks like. I'm so excited. I love this episode. The amount of wisdom we have in this, compassion, heart, brilliance. And for those of you like me who are a little nerdy in science, we do get a little nerdy in science into so much of what brought computers and internet and all of that to where it is today. You're gonna love it. Also, take a moment and share this episode with someone that you think it would make an impact in their life. So pause, go ahead and do that now. You'll forget because the episode's so good, so go ahead and do it now. Alrighty, let's do this. So join me, Angela Gill-Nelms, on today's episode of the Badass Leaders podcast, where I'm joined each week by industry experts for intimate and eye-opening discussions about the challenges and joys facing the leaders of today. Listen in and get ready to scale your company, grow your brand, and unlock your full badass potential.
Sure.
Well, first off, welcome to AGN Studios and the Badass Leaders podcast.
Well, thank you.
We're super excited to have you. Listeners, I mentioned this a little bit in the intro that recorded, but I have known Cathleen for several years. We both serve on the College of Engineering board at Georgia Tech. And as a reminder, this podcast is our beliefs. It doesn't affiliate with any of our work that we do with Georgia Tech or anything like that. And so we're going to feel free to share our thoughts and experiences. Yeah. And one of the things I loved about Cathleen over the years is when you're sitting in a board meeting and you have these high-powered executives, some of us, myself mostly, can talk a lot. and then there are other people that are incredibly wise, and then when they speak up, it's just filled with wisdom. And I always thought that about you, Kathleen. And so then at the last board meeting, when you received your most recent award, I was just like, the world needs to hear more of your life story, how you have arrived here today, some of your struggles, and what advice you might give to other individuals. So now I'm going to pause and shut up. And I want you to tell us, Kathleen, why you're here today, and then let's dig into your life story, who you are as a human being.
Although one thing to say, I think I'm probably like a whole lot of people. I definitely struggle with the imposter syndrome. And especially in the COE meetings, the big meetings, I feel very intimidated by all these people. And I don't often speak up. But in the smaller groups, I think people know I pull my weight and offer my opinion and engage. But I do sometimes find it a little intimidating. It's something I've struggled with my whole life.
Okay, and listeners, if you've already heard the intro and many of the things that Cathleen has done, and we're going to talk about more of them. And I just want to encourage people, because a lot of times people think they're the only ones who experience imposter syndrome. And I had some people tell me recently that they've never experienced imposter syndrome, and I think that's bullshit. I think they're lying. Kudos to you if that's the truth. Yeah. But I love the fact that the reality is imposter syndrome is normal, and just having the courage to speak up anyway. So,
well, I do know, having kind of lived on both sides of the equation, that there are men who experience imposter syndrome.
Yes.
although I think it's much less common. But definitely women in tech, I found, because I've always been very attuned, and I see it. I've seen it many times, and had to try to struggle against it personally, but also for some of my employees,
Yes.
and get them to realize they have so much more to give and could do that job if you would just apply. That kind of thing.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. Okay, so tell us about yourself.
Oh gosh. Well, since I don't know what you said in the intro, but
Just give it to us all.
well, I'm a technologist, and I've been very fortunate to be at the front end of the VLSI silicon integrated circuit. Maybe that's the best way to say it. Revolution that we've gone through, the digital revolution, and specifically, I'm in data communications, and so networking makes everything happen, and in today's internet and connected world. And that I was there when it started, or not exactly, but close enough that it felt
Right.
like you could just jump right in. And I was just really fortunate to work at some companies and work with some people who were really quite visionary. And so it was great. I got to ride the wave, which
What a wave that was,
well,
right?
it's certainly, and it's still going.
Yes.
I think certainly AI and its impacts will be going to continue to drive us forward in technology. So it'll be interesting to see where that goes. And of course, data communications is absolutely crucial to AI. So I don't know. It'll be interesting to see how it goes.
And I'm going to go ahead and say it here. You didn't bring your Emmy with you, did you? Oh, we need a picture of the Emmy.
I wasn't sure whether, it's still so awkward, but I thought, well, maybe if you wanted to see it just as a, for
real
you,
life,
but
yes.
I did not want to bring it on camera.
I love it. Okay. But what it is I think I learned something new at that event, because when I think when a lot of the world thinks of Emmys, they think in one area and they don't realize about the technology Emmys.
Yeah.
And so you and your team that are on the patent for, go ahead and describe what it is, for broadband, recently received honor for that and your hard work and what the impact it has had on the world.
Yeah, no, that's true. And honestly, I had no idea there was an award, an Emmy Award for technology. It's actually the Technology and Engineering Emmy, which appears to be issued like every other year. It's like on a 2-year thing, but again, I don't know. But it was for actually to Broadcom, the corporation that I was there early on and started the cable division, the cable business for Broadcom, and it was the award was for pioneering high performance communications over cable TV networks, which is basically streaming TV. So yeah, it was pretty cool. It was really nice to get recognized.
Awesome.
And so there were, I guess, a total of 6 of us were recognized by name. But honestly, there were hundreds and hundreds of people and some incredibly smart people who worked really hard on this. So it was a Broadcom award. It's not just me, but I was very flattered, and it was great to get one personally. So yeah.
Well, I think it's amazing. I think especially both of us being engineers, and so I want to talk about you coming up through school. We both went to Georgia Tech.
We did.
So we both bleed Georgia Tech. And I think that when you get honored for hard work, it's one thing, you have over 100 patents,
Yeah,
right?
that's right.
So you have over 100 patents. You've done so much innovative work. And to have a moment years after you've been a part of a team that's invented something that's had such a major impact. Think about streaming TV over the internet and cable, right? Like, that is huge. And so I guess over cable. And I think to be able to be recognized for that, just kudos to the world for that kind of stuff, because it's added so much value.
It was really meaningful to me. I was pretty floored. So
how about we do this? Why don't we talk a little bit about your life and how you got into broadband and how you got into that. So tell us a little bit about who you are.
Well, I grew up in Washington, D.C. My father was a biochemist with the government. He worked at the National Science Foundation and NIH, and he was one of these researchers coming out. He went to school on the GI Bill after World War II, and was a scientist, and he had high expectations of his children to do well and to do something scientific. He felt like, you needed something that you could fall back on and you could always get a job. And so he had very strong opinions about what he wanted to do. He actually wanted me to go into the military as well. And that was just never going to happen, honestly, for reasons I couldn't really elucidate at the time. But certainly that was not going to happen. But I did go to engineering school. Although by the time I got to high school, and I was good at math and science, I was really a good student. But I wanted to go study philosophy and write music and play songs and, do that kind of thing. And he was not going to have it. I also played some sports, and I got a scholarship offer to play sports in college. And he was not going to have that either. He insisted I go to Georgia Tech. At this point, he was a professor at the University of Georgia. And he insisted that I go to Georgia Tech.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah,
Look
yeah.
at that. You mean that community college up in Athens, right?
Yeah, whatever, somewhere over there.
Right, exactly.
But yeah, so I ended up going to Georgia Tech and studying electrical engineering, which I had an affinity for. I mean, I had built my own guitar effects processors early on, which I still actually tinker in, which is kind of fun. And I'd been a ham radio operator, so I built some radios and had, I was interested in electronics, but I was rebelling.
Right.
I didn't want to do anything my father wanted me to do, especially because I was kind of the forgotten middle child. I was the fourth of five, and my younger brother had some serious mental health issues. And so, I was just left to my own devices, yeah, which in a lot of ways is good. I think it's healthy for kids, but I was definitely just ignored. So I don't know. I had, and also I was, from early on, I was struggling with my identity as and honestly, this was in the 60s. I had no words or concepts to put to what I was feeling.
Right.
And there were no, I guess there were actually role models and people, but I had no access to them, right? It's not like today you can search on the internet. Well, so I had no idea really what was the matter with me, but I knew something was wrong. And, after getting beaten up, in school every day for years, I decided this is not the right thing. And so I learned to be another person. I learned to be something I knew I was not. And I think long-term, mentally, that was a huge mistake because I was very false. I created a whole persona, and I could be that person. And it had some dips and things, but I definitely felt like I had a role to play, and I did it. And that took its toll. Yeah. So eventually I had to face to the music, and I couldn't go on anymore pretending to be a man. And thankfully it worked out where, medical science is wonderful, and, there's a lot you can do. If, unfortunately it's only for people who have the funds, which is terrible.
Right.
And we're rolling back so much of the progress we've made in society today in the U.S. But I was very fortunate, so I was able to to do as much as medical science would allow. But without it, I wouldn't be here to talk with you. I just wasn't going to make it. It just took it all out of me, and eventually I was empty. And so anyway, I went to Georgia Tech, studied electrical engineering, and they didn't have computer engineering at the time, so I did the computer science minor thing. And I co-opted and got to work writing code early on and designing hardware, and some analog too. So I did analog and digital, and got involved with the first company I started with after college was a company called DCA, or Digital Communications Associates. And they were an early networking company. They did some X.25 and async dial-up things, and sort of sharing terminals for like mini computers.
Okay.
Which was sort of niche, right? I mean, it was a little different, but they.
And this was in about what year was this?
I graduated in 1984, but I started working for DCA in 1983.
Okay.
And.
So really, I mean, I'm just thinking in my head because I'm a little younger. I was born in 75, And so I, got for graduation, I got a computer for graduation.
Oh, wow.
We had a computer in our house. And so I was very fortunate and did gifted programs and did computer stuff. But I think about the advances that you were on that way. Like you were talking about that wave of the advances that happened in the 80s and 90s was just so phenomenal.
Yeah, absolutely. When I was in high school, I got what were those things called? A time.
Macintosh or...
No, Macs
was way
and
before
PCs
that.
didn't exist.
I know, that's right.
I guess it ran CPM. I don't know.
What is CPM?
Computer Pro. I don't know. It was the precursor to DOS.
Because I learned on DOS.
System. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So there was some stuff. In fact, when I was younger, my dad actually, he was a biochemist, but by that time, his role at the University of Georgia was working at their computer center.
Okay.
And so he was I don't know what he did exactly, but I do know he led COSMIC, which dealt with disseminating NASA technology to the world and other things. And one of the big things he did was he started computer centers all over the country.
Wow.
And helped because biochemists were some of the early adopters, because you had thousands and thousands of organic compounds, right?
Oh,
and so being able to build a database that was searchable in certain ways was a huge thing. And the government did that. And so he was involved in that. So I would go to work with him this was in Athens, Georgia, and play on the computers in the summer sometimes. And these were mainframes, that.
Wow.
So I learned, to program some basic things and do, JCL stuff, and just because I was fun and I could do that. But DCA started building add-in boards for the IBM PC, which was just released in 1983, I guess. 82 or 83 was when it was actually announced. And that was the big shift, I think, that happened that sort of made small computers now sort of suitable for business, and it took off, right? And we've all seen the effects of that. But DCA built these add-in cards to expand the capabilities.
Was it like expanding memory or expanding like additional options that you could do?
Well, what we did,
neither?
Which was cool, we built a card called IRMA. And IRMA, you could plug directly into a 3270 network system from IBM.
Okay.
So think of banks and insurance companies that use big IBM mainframes. IBM had ways to distribute terminals throughout your building, so everyone could work. And that was all well and good. But what we did was we designed a board that could plug directly into the system, and the system, the IBM system, thought it was a terminal. We also did printer emulation, but it thought it was a terminal. Okay. And then in the IBM PC, we then wrote software that you could run that would allow you to run a IBM terminal program. We called it an emulator.
Okay.
And we came up with cool ways where you could swap back and forth between, your Lotus 123 spreadsheet and your IBM screen, for your corporate data. Plus, we figured out ways to scrape data off the mainframe and then bring it into Lotus 123. And so it was a real, it took off. And,
wow.
And that was really fun. So that was my introduction to data communications, was what are all these things? And I did take some classes at school, so it wasn't like I was totally ignorant, but you had it was trial by fire, because this was a small company, and it was like, here, go do this, and you said, okay, great, and off you went,
That's the best. I think entrepreneurs, because we both love entrepreneurship. I love when people that are doing internships or co-ops are given those types of projects, like not fill up my coffee cup, but here's a problem no one has a solution to. Go figure it out.
Well, I was really fortunate, I think, when I co-opted, because I worked for this totally different company. Instead of chips, which I began to design later, I worked for a company that made the machines that put the chips into the bags, the potato chips.
Oh.
Yeah, which was, you start thinking about it, that's kind of that's a lot of automation. And then those days, it was all analog scales and motors and actuators and stuff, but they were trying to get into the computer age. And so they were using these early microprocessors to try to automate some of their things. And a lot of these engineers there had worked there for 50 years, and they had no, the new technology to them was vacuum tubes, right? So they were like lost. I shouldn't say. I mean, these were great guys. I really enjoyed and learned a lot from them. But, when I said, well, gee, I've taken a class in writing assembler for 8085, Intel 8085 processors. And they said, great, here. And so I was writing code as a co-op. Wow. Which was a lot of fun, and then bringing the boards up. And so like I said earlier on, I was very fortunate to be, in multiple places, multiple companies where they just let me go and let me figure things out and to learn and to ride a new wave, because it wasn't all that well known. It wasn't like you could go get a PhD in this at that time, right? It was all new and exciting and, hey, if you're interested, go do it. So.
That is exciting.
Yeah.
Okay, so you started doing that, and then what did you transition to next?
Well, that was also at the time at DCA when the world of electronics at that time was made up of these little small logic blocks. Think of, you might have a single little chip, and it had 4 AND gates to do the logical AND function. Yep. 2 inputs and a single output. Okay. Or a package of 4 or 6 OR gates, OR functions. Yep. That kind of thing, that level.
And for listeners, like an AND or an OR function would be like 2 things are coming in, and if it's put in an AND chip, then they're combined into one.
Right.
And if it's OR, 2 things are coming in, and then based on the needs of it, it's either taking this or this to give the output.
Yeah, it's just, so it's Boolean logic.
Yep.
And that's how digital design was done, but we also did analog design too in that sort of level, at that tiny level. So you would have boards with hundreds and hundreds of these little chips, and you design the cards to connect them all, and that was pretty cool. But right at that time, the technology was coming out where you could actually design programmable chips that would do, you could specify what you wanted it to do. And, I took to that like a house of fire. And then we actually got the chance to go design an actual integrated circuit with a company called VLSI, who was a pioneer in building what they now call ASICs, application-specific integrated circuits. Because we were a hardware maker, and our boards were expensive, and yet we needed to increase volume and lower the cost. And so that was a way we could do that. And again, it was just like at the right time, I had been working there, and they said, well, who needs to go work on, I'll go work on this chip. And so I learned to design, at that time it was a standard cell. And so I worked with a standard cell. And I was doing work there with the IBM protocol. And so I'd written software to translate the protocol and to debug what happens on the wire between the mainframe and the terminal. And so I was doing all that work, and got recruited by a company in Silicon Valley, National Semiconductor, because they actually made the receiver and transmitter that went on our IRMA board.
Right.
And so we were using...
I know this, yes.
Yeah, and they wanted to take a jump and take a processor, a CPU, pull in their receiver and their transmitter, or as much as they could, and all the other logic, that used to be hundreds of little chips, and we want to pull them all in. And so I got recruited by them to come work on that for them. And so that was called the Biphase Communications Processor, which was really a lot of fun.
Where did you go live in Silicon Valley?
I ended up moving to Texas, to Arlington. They had a big factory there. National and Texas Instruments had a long-standing partnership. And I think eventually TI bought National or something. We were there, but of course, the mothership was in Santa Clara. And so I spent a lot of time in Santa Clara. And, I did stay there quite a bit. But my family stayed in Texas. So, but the BCP was quite a fun thing. And we built an integrated chip, and I got to do that. And then, so I was really in the heart of data communications at that point.
I love your reaction to things when they're like, who wants to do this? And you're like, I'll do it. I'll do it. I'll do it. Like, that's amazing.
Well, and that's what happened again. I'd been working on this stuff and for IBM communications, but it seemed to me that was sort of a dying world. Mainframes were sort of fading, it seemed like. And, it seemed like the world was moving forward with these personal computers. You had a computer on your desk. And So when there was a group in National in Santa Clara that was talking about doing this strange protocol called Ethernet, I said, well, I want to do that.
Right.
And so, so I went out to Santa Clara and worked on some of the original 10 megabit Ethernet chips. And National was a real leader in Ethernet. And that's where I started getting involved with standards, because Ethernet was one of those things that was standardized by the IEEE, the 802.3 was the Ethernet spec. And so that was a collaborative thing that allowed companies to not be, any trust issues were put aside to allow companies to work together and share that intellectual property in a lot of ways. You could still patent it and you could still own it, but you had to agree to give it to,
So it's like maybe like an open source, but still patented, but like what we think of open source today?
Yeah,
a little bit?
I think open source sort of came out of some of that work.
Okay.
I think, obviously that's software, but...
Right. But the idea kind of...
Yeah, so in other words, competitors could get together and work out a way so things would be interoperable across manufacturers. I think the world was sort of still... We were coming out of the antitrust sort of issues about IBM's system was totally closed. Okay. And they had to be forced to release the specifications to allow people to build things that were compatible. Same way with the telephone system, right? It was the Bell system, and it was proprietary from the very smallest component up to the big switches. And the government forced them to open up and to break open those monopolies, and that then things like interoperability between companies became really an issue. And plus you had things like now an IBM PC, which IBM, so unlike them, published the specs. They gave you the BIOS. They gave you the schematics. They said, here, go build stuff for it. Which, how, why? Apple didn't do that. Apple's ecosystem has been closed. I mean, it's closed. I mean, you were able to design things. You could become a vendor. You can write software.
Do you think that was a good thing that IBM did that, or do you think it was a bad thing that Apple didn't, or just two different mindsets?
Yeah, good and bad. That's kind of hard to say.
Right.
Well, so I think the legacy. So let's look at it from the legacy.
Okay.
IBM computers or IBM-based PCs are notoriously full of viruses and because the specs are there, and anyone can build anything and sell it. There's no compatibility requirement unless you force it. And IBM didn't hold court and say, okay, you're approved and you're not. But that's what Apple did. Apple would allow people to design things, and they encouraged it, but they had the final say-so. And they would check to make sure things were compatible. And so it was much more difficult for rogue players to write things that were, you can still do it.
Right.
But it was much more difficult. And so, all right, the legacy then is the IBM market. The PC market is probably 10 times what the Apple market is. Mm-hmm. Although Apple's been able to command a premium for their products because they're compatible. I guess. I don't know, but I would say that's sort of the legacy. Is that good or bad?
Yeah,
I don't know.
I'm an Apple. I'm a Mac, Apple, iPhone. And I will tell you, I've done, and my first computer was an IBM computer, my first personal one that I had when I went to college, which I would tell you was the greatest thing, because I went to college and I was the only person on my floor in the dorm that had a computer and a printer. And so I will say that I did get a lot of free beer for
I bet.
And it was Ice House back in the day. And then I read some of my English papers that I wrote, and I was like, I probably should have had less beer at that point. But it was like, you have a computer? Okay, I need to write my paper instead of going to the library.
Yeah.
I'll do it. That was amazing. But so I have throughout my life, I have used Droid products. I have used PCs at whatever. But I have to say, I'll tell you how I converted to Mac the first time. I was at Georgia Tech, and I went back to school at Georgia Tech as a 29-year-old single mom. So this was circa 2004. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
And I'd never used a Mac before. And I was in the library, and at that time, if you needed to print something off or use a computer, there were lines. And so they had this big, long line for all these PCs. And I'm lazy, Kathleen. And I'm like, look at that big, long line. And And the line for the Mac had 3 people in it. I still remember the moment I got out of the PC line and walked my butt over to the Mac line. And then I in my head, I can still picture that computer and walking up to it and going, oh, I have a freaking clue how to use this. But I learned how to use it. And then today people make fun of me. But I did go at one point, I tried like a Droid phone, and because I love technology and stuff. Yeah. And then I was just like, the ability for everything to sync on Apple is like, for this lazy girl, it's sign me up. But that's amazing to hear.
Yeah. But I mean, Apple is quite the story because they nearly went under. Right?
Yes, right.
Steve Jobs got fired. I mean, it was like the whole thing. And at the time, it seemed like that whole closed model was not a great idea because they could never really get market share. It seemed like.
Right.
And we actually at DCA, we built products. We built like an IRMA equivalent for the Mac.
Okay.
And so I had some experience with Mac, but mainly, I knew all the ins and outs of the IBM BIOS and how you made stuff work, and from the interface in the hardware as well as the software. So, I was definitely a PC person.
Yes, for sure.
But I shifted when my children got old enough to download things they shouldn't, like things that would be like games that would have viruses.
Right.
And so it was like I was putting out fires in my own home network and PCs because I just couldn't convince them not to do this. And so I moved over to Mac and took them with me.
Right.
And then it was a lot harder for them to get evil things, which made it work a whole lot better. That was back in the day. Well, I don't know. We didn't allow personal computers in their rooms. We had like a
main area. Yep.
Originally was a playroom when they were teeny, but it became sort of a shared workspace, and they the machines were there, so to have some level of control.
Yeah, which I think would be a good model today for parents and teens. I think,
But now you have a router in your pocket, right?
Exactly.
I mean, the phone is just amazing.
Okay, so you went along this journey, and then what came next? And talk about what. So I'm really curious. My grandfather had a lot of patents as well, and so for the companies that he had, got the money and stuff from the patents. But I think. I was trying to remember. His were like submarines, and my aunt and uncle are gonna yell at me because I'm gonna get this wrong. Like something to do with one of the bombs or something like that too.
Oh wow!
I don't know. I'm getting it 100% wrong. Other than it was cool and the patent idea then and the way it was with the company. So how was it coming up? Graduating from school and then getting into industry and having the opportunity back then to have your name on patents. What did that look like then versus what maybe you think it looks like now for people?
The first time I got to even think about patents was at National. And when we were building I got tasked with building this group and doing 100 megabit Ethernet, which was the new thing at that time. And so we actually built the first 100 megabit Ethernet repeater. That was the networking element and some of those things. And we developed a number of the technologies that made Ethernet work really well. I don't know if you know, but you can, if you have this will get way too technical. If you have a 100 megabit Ethernet port, but you're now plugging it into a gigabit router,
right?
You don't have to tell it. It figures
it out. Right.
Well, so that originally was called we called it N-Way. And so the teams at National that I was with patented that. And it was because we were in the standards and we needed the cachet and hey, we've got patents too, we can contribute. And so it became a standard, right? I don't know that they made money specifically on the patent, but it was a way to for the company to have its bona fides or whatever, in the groups. So we patented this N-Way technology that allowed a 10 megabit at the time, because that was what was ubiquitous, 10 megabit to work with a 100 megabit repeater or switch. And they could work that out. And it's still used today, all the way up to 10 gig now. They still communicate backwards. Well, I guess there is a limit. I guess you can't go all the way back, but it's still the way the thing works. Wow. So it was pretty cool. So that was the first time I was exposed to it. And And that was fun.
How did it feel when you saw your first patent with your name on it?
It was pretty wild. Although I really didn't see that until it takes a long time.
Yeah, it does.
And so I was already gone from national at that point. But
Okay.
but no, we did 100 megabit Ethernet, and I didn't really get into patents until I left national to work in a startup in Atlanta, actually, that wanted to do digital telephony. Sorry, that's the wrong word. Cable telephony. They wanted to do.
What is that?
They wanted to take a telephone, your telephone system, and run that over the cable system that already came to your house delivering cable TV.
Yep.
They wanted to deliver phone quality, Bell quality phone service to your house over the cable, as opposed to the little twisted pair wires that run, parallel on these power poles. And I thought that was cool. I thought cable was really interesting at the time, and partially because trying to do Ethernet on this cheap, nasty, twisted pair wire, we were always thinking, man, if we had a broadband cable, just think what we could do.
Right.
But, it was like, well, that's not the way of the world. And, Ethernet was baseband. It was very different. And so I thought, well, this would be really neat. And so I went to work for this startup to try to do, and plus my, to build chips with that. And early on, I thought, well, what we really ought to do was we ought to take Ethernet and the networking infrastructure, which was growing, and just because it was sort of open source, right? You could get this, you could do stuff. So the IP, the Internet Protocol, was starting to really take off through all sorts of different companies. And I thought, that's what we really ought to do is run Ethernet over the broadband cable. Which,
what an idea. I just got chills.
People were saying, oh, that's a stupid idea. But other people had it too. And so one of the companies I interfaced with at Eris, that was the startup, was I met the two founders of Broadcom.
Okay.
And they had an earlier company, which I can't think of the name, but I ended up meeting them. And the IEEE decided, again, like 802.3, the Ethernet group, they opened a new group for broadband internet working, networking. And so I decided I wanted to, that made sense. It connected with Eris. And so I started working there, working in that group, volunteering to
and for
participate.
people who don't know what IEEE is, can you just tell them what
sure.
that
It's
is?
the Institute for Electrical and Electronic Engineers. It's a worldwide organization that provides all sorts of professional services for engineers, electrical engineers in particular, but also has this whole standards arm that has been, so helpful in this whole world of.
Yeah.
So Internet Protocol, Ethernet, all these things, a lot of them really came out of the 802 standards body.
Okay.
So they started a new thing, for cable. And
once again, you're like, I'm in.
I know. And so I ended up writing this paper on how you could do this, how you could do Ethernet or Ethernet concepts over cable. And I gave a paper at an IEEE conference. We would have these, and Henry and Nick, the two co-founders of Broadcom, heard me give this paper. It was in Boulder, Colorado in 1994 maybe. And they heard the paper and decided, we need to hire this person. And they were physical layer people. They dealt with the actual modulation and forming the waves that travel down the wires, right? They didn't really care how or what was supposed to carry. We just want to make the wave go down the wire and receive it accurately at the other end. I'm making it sound like it's no big deal. It's huge.
It's huge.
I mean, it's very, very difficult. And they were brilliant, or they still are. Thankfully, they're still with us. But just brilliant people. But that was their area, was the physical layer.
Yeah.
And they were smart, and they understood that if that was ever going to go anywhere, they needed the next layer up, which was the media access control layer, the MAC layer. And that was kind of my specialty. And so I had this whole paper on Mac level and all this stuff. So they said, well, we need to recruit this person.
Yes.
So they recruited, and of course they gave me, they tried to convince me. I told them no. And then, like just kept after me. So I think it took 6 months for them to convince me to leave my job in Atlanta and go to work for them in California. And my family wouldn't go, so they stayed in Atlanta.
Okay.
And
at this point, you had your wife and two kids?
Two kids, yeah. A son and a daughter. And and so they stayed in Atlanta, and I started this back and forth thing to send it to...
It's so hard. Whenever I hear about people who do that, I'm like, I have no idea how you do it.
It was crazy, but through hook and by crook, I was able to open a design center at Georgia Tech, actually, because there was a brilliant man at Georgia Tech, John Lim, Dr. Lim, who I'm going to forget all his things, but he had a special appointment both in computer science and in electrical engineering, and he had spent his career at Bell Labs. I mean, just a brilliant man and a wonderful man. Not only was he
How do you
smart,
think your leaders, like your managers that you had throughout this journey, what kind of leadership management style did you experience from them, being young and brilliant and in this huge transition phase? Did you have a lot of great leaders and managers? Did you have some of the older ones that were maybe like jealous of the young people coming up? Did you have any of those challenges during that phase?
I really didn't. I was just so fortunate.
It's amazing.
I had mentors and bosses who just said, hey, go for it. Just do it. And, it was one of those things where it was better to beg forgiveness than to ask permission. You just did it.
Yes.
And then, you did what? You spent what? Oh, I see. Great. Good idea. Great
I'm
job.
so happy I was hoping that was going to be the response, because oftentimes I think of these leaders and managers who hold people back. I'm like, you have no idea the level of innovation, especially a brilliant mind like yours, that can happen, and the world change that can happen if you have this mindset like, okay, let's go, let's break it and fix it and figure it out.
Well, and that was really not the norm, I think, at National. But I was very fortunate. There was the leader of Ethernet, the Ethernet group at National, was a man named, I'm going to get his name wrong, is McKinnon, Edward McKinnon, I believe. But the VLSI design manager that I worked for was Edwin D'Souza, and that was just who he was. He would empower you and say, go make it happen, and just, don't come back until you do. And he was great. I mean, he was actually amazing. In some ways hard to work for, but he was also he helped me tremendously. So great leader. And I think maybe that's sort of the definition I took of leadership, which was finding good people, smart people, give them the tools that they need and the direction, and let them go do it.
Yes.
And not, look over their shoulder constantly. And National wanted, papers about how you're going to do this and what's your performance review, and that's all necessary and important. I get that, but he kind of fought against that. No, you just go do it, and we'll figure out how to write your goals later. Yeah, so that was great. So Edwin was a great boss, but I left him to go work at Eris, and I was only there a short period of time when I got recruited to go help start Broadcom. I was a very, very early employee. They had already started doing an Ethernet chip, actually, which I think Henry and Nick thought, well, she's done Ethernet and she's doing this. It's like two birds with one stone. We could get one person and they just can work 24 hours a day rather than just 18. They were big on working really hard.
Yeah.
But that was okay. But that's what Broadcom did. Is those guys hired just great people and told them to go do it, and gave us the tools that we needed. Although we were startups, so we couldn't just buy things.
Right.
And in fact,
how small was Broadcom at the time when you joined? Do you remember what employee number you were?
I think I was 17 or something.
Okay. Wow.
Yeah. And we were bootstrapped, and so we did not do any venture capital. We did end up getting, we took investments from two customers in order to, I guess, give them some semblance of control or something. Right. But they weren't huge.
Okay.
They were. It was Scientific Atlanta here in Atlanta and General Instrument.
Oh, yeah.
Both big players in the cable world. So we took actually some investment from both of them and work with them. I think we had some good collaboration with them. But other than that, we bootstrapped. So we were, very cash strapped. It wasn't like we could,
Right.
go to Wall Street and say, hey, we need this amount of money to go do this. So, but we grew rapidly, and we went public in 1998.
Wow. What was that experience like for you?
Oh, it was crazy. See, I went, my whole conversation with my wife was, I'm going to have to work really hard.
Right.
And it's going to be really, really hard for me. And that means it's going to be hard for you.
Right.
We had 2 small children, and we said, maybe, because it was all based on stock compensation, right?
Okay.
I had to take a cut and pay, and everybody had to take a cut and pay because we didn't have the money,
Right.
but we got generous stock options. And so, thinking about it, well, gosh, if we could pay off the house, then maybe I could retire and teach physics at the high school, or we could do something, we'd
Right.
have more freedom, and I
Right.
could be home more. And, it was sort of this wager. Can
Right.
I hold on for 4 years till everything vests, and hopefully we'll have made it, which was kind of a crazy idea given how many startups fail. But, I believed in the technology, and so we ended up doing it. But it was a real risk.
Yeah. It paid off.
It did. It far better payoff than I ever imagined at the kitchen
Right.
table,
Right.
sketching out, well, maybe it'll go to this, and we'll make this, this little thing. And so it was really great that it did so well. But no, seeing the IPO was just incredible.
Wow.
I think we were the biggest IPO in terms of the jump from offer price to closing price that had been in history at that point,
Okay.
which was totally obliterated, I think, the next month by Netscape, which, kind of makes sense.
Yep.
But, and I may have that wrong, I don't know, but we had some huge honor. Broadcom did super well. We had really sold people on the potential of the technology. And so we went public and just went crazy. Our stock price went up, and we started to buy companies just by printing some more stock, or I don't know what we did
Right.
exactly. I was the technologist,
Right.
and these guys ran the corporation and pushed it forward, and I just kept my head down trying to make cable modems work.
Yeah.
That was a big deal, right? It wasn't just the modem that's at your house, which is the piece everybody sees, but the technology at the head end to deal with those thousands of modems on a single cable, the one little cable that comes down your street, right? There's one cable comes down your street, connects to everybody's house, right? And so the thing that is able to manage all those modems and get the data to and from them at extremely high rates, which is what it was all about. People
Right.
had been sending data back
Okay.
and forth on cable. We didn't invent that. We came up with a really great way to do it, but people were already innovating in that space. And Scientific Atlanta, for instance, tremendous company, tremendous smart people. We were able to build the pieces though, and build them in silicon, and write the software to make them work to enable you to do high performance. I mean, really high performance stuff. So that was pretty cool. I'm rambling.
I know. I love this. I'm just sitting here thinking, this is so amazing.
Oh,
Keep going.
gosh.
You're not rambling. I'm just picturing this in my head. I'm remembering when I first got internet in Orlando, Florida, and it was circa 1995, and where you're just hearing the dial tone.
Oh yeah, the dial-up modems.
And you would start it, and then you would go in the kitchen, make a sandwich, and then come back, and maybe I'm online. And,
maybe not.
and let me try and send an email, and I'm going to go now and make another sandwich.
Yeah. Oh, that's crazy. No, well, so that, you talked about switching over to Mac at Georgia Tech.
Yeah.
My first quarter at Georgia Tech, I took the Fortran programming course, as a lot of EEs would do. And so we did it all on punch cards, and we would go to the computer center and run these punch cards through. And I could.
Did you ever drop your packet of punch
I
cards?
did.
Everyone has that story.
And luckily, in that and those programs were not so huge. They were. I can remember seeing this woman come bustling around the corner, and she must have had, I don't know how many, but a stack maybe 10 inches thick. and she runs into somebody because we were all working,
Right.
late at night. We were all tired, and the cards went everywhere. And she just burst into tears, the poor thing. I mean, it was like all that work, and how do you get them back in order? It was crazy. So yeah, we were all picking up cards and trying to help put them together. But I noticed that it was probably graduate students or somebody. They had labs back then with terminals in them.
Oh.
Not PC, right? PCs didn't exist in 1979 when I was doing this. But they had rooms where you could actually sit down. And I'd used a terminal at
your dad's, right?
Yeah. So I'm thinking, that's what I need to do.
Yes.
So when I went home for Christmas, I built a monitor, with a keyboard and a monitor. And I got a dial-up modem, and this was the kind of modem where you actually had to take the handset from the phone and put it in those little rubber cuffs.
Oh, yes.
Because it actually just squawked and squeaked into the microphone. I mean, it was like so crazy. And this, I think, was 200 baud maybe, and then it went to 300 baud. So a baud would be symbol rate. So 300 symbols were encoded with data. So it's basically 300 bits per second. Wow. And then, of course, it would crash. And it would hang up or whatever. But so when I got back in the winter, I had my own modem in my terminal, and I could work from my dorm room. So that worked. Did
anyone bring you beers like they brought me?
They tried. Yeah. That was the only reason why I had any friends, to be honest. But no, that's not exactly true. But no, it was a very good move.
Yeah.
But basically, I think the thing about Broadcom was we were a semiconductor company, and we had a new model, which was we didn't have the $1 billion it would take to go build a semiconductor fabrication plant from the ground up, which is what you did back then. National had these plants, and they cost a fortune, and they had the army of chemists and physicists and everybody to run the fabs, and of course the technology kept changing, and so you had all this overhead to do these fabs. Intel, the other semiconductor companies, they were based on, they had the manufacturing technology. But Broadcom was based on the idea that there was just then starting to be some like open third-party silicon manufacturers, in particular Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Corporation, TSMC in Taiwan. And they had excess capacity that they would sell. And so our model was we were going to design our own chips and then build them at TSMC. Oh. And we don't have to buy a fab. All we have to do is buy the wafers from TSMC. And there were a few others. But that was kind of the idea, which turned out to be really good. I mean, really good. And that's kind of the model today, what people do. TSMC is like a huge provider of silicon for everybody because everybody does this now. But we were one of the early ones to do that, and that was a big thing. But we knew as a semiconductor maker, we'd seen other companies get to a certain size and get destroyed because all these people who owned fabs and had been building silicon since it started in the 50s and 60s, they had all these patents on how you build integrated circuits.
Okay.
And as soon as you got to a certain point, it was like the mosquito. Once it gets big enough and is a big enough threat, you swat it. So they would come and swat you. And we figured the only way...
Because they were swatting for patent infringement?
Yes.
Okay.
And they would come and make you pay exorbitant fee, a lot of money. And that could ruin your business model, right? Or put you out of business or whatever. And so we figured early on that the only way we were going to survive that was to have some patents we could trade. Oh. And so when, the Intels and Nationals of the world came knocking saying, you're violating our patent, we'd go, well, we think you're violating one of our patents too. How about we make a deal?
And love
so
this.
From early on, we had this big focus on intellectual property and writing disclosures. That was a huge thing because it takes time and energy and money.
Right.
And we didn't have time or energy or money. So it was a big focus. And it was a really good thing we did.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
So yeah, it was like expected. And we were building stuff no one had ever built before. So that was ripe for patents, and it also helped you in the standards committees.
Yeah.
So yeah, we really encouraged employees to file for patents, and every year we would have this engineering awards banquet thing, and the highlight was the person who got the most patents that year would get this big award, and they would honor everybody in their patents, and we got cash awards for them.
Wow.
Yeah. I mean, that was like they wanted to motivate us to do the extra, because it wasn't like you got time to go do this.
Right.
Like, you know, this was
on top of everything else.
Yeah, on top of the already 12, 14-hour days, we want you to file these patents. Yeah. But I mean, they did have, legal support, legal folks. And so it was great. And a lot of my patents ended up coming after that cable modem. We patented a lot of stuff for the cable modem. But then afterwards, my career, I was burned out, and I took a little bit of a break, and then got lured back into Broadcom. So they claimed I never left, but I did take a sabbatical. But I came back and went into what they called the CTO's office. So I was the cable, the cable on the cable side. And we would do this thing where every 3 months or so, we were all technologists in different fields. So Broadcom had acquired companies and grown, and we had all these different technologies. And we would get all these people like me, we'd all go together to a resort someplace or a hotel where, we wouldn't have constant interruptions from our staffs. And we would have patent attorneys in the back, and we would we would get a theme. We would all know this theme, and we would come and spend 2 days, 3 days, whatever it was, and just brainstorm and come up with ideas. And we would come out, and people were typing them up in the back as we spoke.
As fast as they could.
As they could.
Yeah.
And so I've got all these, I actually got some patents I could not even remember, because we had just done these things and had some great.
So these are your hackathons from back in the day.
The hackathon, yes, great idea, great thing, yeah. No, we had all kinds of great ideas, it seemed like. Or I should say, we thought they were great ideas.
Right.
They didn't always turn out to be great ideas,
Right.
but that was probably the highlight of my career. That's hard to say, because I've had a lot of highlights, but it was those times with these people who were really smart, way smarter than me, but we all had our sort of different area we brought to the table.
Right.
And I have to say, we talked earlier about imposter syndrome.
Yep.
That's kind of when I got over it. I mean, still, it's always with you, I suppose, but it is still for me in the College of Engineering. But, Broadcom had zillions of PhDs, these brilliant people from all over. And I graduated from I got out and never going back,
Exactly.
So I had
we both just have bachelors, right?
Right, a reputable degree, but that was it. And
but if Georgia Tech ever wants to give us honorary degrees, we will accept them.
Well, it's funny. At Broadcom, it was just assumed that you had a PhD. I mean, it was just assumed. And so I got an award one time at the big gala thing, for patents, for technology awards. And the guy put PhD behind my name because he just
assumed,
right. Which, was not accurate. I did not earn one. But if Georgia Tech ever decides they want to give me one, it'd be fine. And I've already got the plaque that says it, so
right.
It'd be fine. That would be fine. But no, it was really intimidating because these people were like absolutely brilliant. But I realized I had some things I could offer. And I had a perspective, and it was, I found I could share it, and it was great for them to do the same. And we benefited so much from getting the insight from these different perspectives on technologies that were all related, but were not the same, very different than me. And we had people who were focused on cell phone technology. And then we had this hard drive division or focus, and these guys made chips that read the data on and off the platters, which is very, very different than but it was still related. We were still moving data. So it was all related, but it was just so cool, to do that. So,
and also thinking about diversity, really what I'm hearing is you had a diverse group of minds with different skill sets throwing out ideas that could create an integration of something even better because you were hearing all these different levels of expertise in completely different areas.
Absolutely. So Broadcom, I think, gets full points for having a very racially, and what's the word for it? We had people from all over the world.
All
we
walks
had,
of
we
life.
had, well, we weren't great at hiring women. Really, we were awful. But part of that was, we just haven't encouraged women in STEM. And so
Right.
it's getting better, thankfully. But at that time, there were just very few
Right.
folks. And I hired a number of them, to be honest, because, I just had a bent for that.
Right.
But the Broadcom benefited from the fact that U.S. universities were the envy of the world, and the best and the brightest from all over comes to the United States to study. And then if you can get them a green card, boy, you've got these brilliant minds, along with Americans like me, right? We had a mix, and that was really cool. The mixes of cultures and languages, and like in that office of the CTO, we had folks from Turkey and from China, from Korea, it was so cool everywhere. And that, I think, really helped us.
And at this stage, remind us, this is all before you transitioned, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So did you feel like, during the stage, you're in one way having the time of your life. You're building these amazing things. And in another way, you're kind of not being able to be your authentic self in this area. Was that a struggle during this phase? And how much of an impact do you think it had on the way that you led and managed your teams?
I think let me say that, so as a child, I knew something was up with me, but I couldn't put words to it. So sort of the natural assumption, I think, that I made anyway, was that I must be gay, which was a new thing. It seemed like, So as soon as I got to Georgia Tech and I wasn't living at home, the first thing I did was head across the Fifth Street Bridge into the gay mecca that was Midtown at the time.
Yep.
And so I did that, and that was good in a lot of ways for me. But of course, the AIDS epidemic was just kicking off, and that was terrifying. And so I realized I wasn't gay.
Right.
Something
I think
was
a lot
up.
of people don't understand the difference in that, and I think just educating people on that, because it is.
It's definitely not a choice. And so I had to sort of figure that out. But what that meant was I was hiding again. I was pretending to be. So I kept these silos of my life where no one from this area could ever interact with people from this area. And so friends at Georgia Tech had no idea. And people I went to high school with, it was all separate things. And so that mental discipline or
Gymnastics,
having to do that was difficult. And it also took a toll on me. I was taught that it was not right to lie. And yet I was lying through my teeth in everything I did. And then as things got more complicated, I had to verbally lie. I had to make up these stories to keep things straight. And, that ate at me. But honestly, at one point at Georgia Tech, I decided I was scared about the AIDS epidemic, and also I had a religious background that said this was wrong, that I'm wrong to do this. And so I can remember I had a come to Jesus meeting in the parking lot outside of the IEEE, the EE building. That was when you could actually still drive near there. You
can't
get anywhere near there. So I think this was a parking lot, which is approximately where Klaus is now.
Okay,
I think.
got
Anyway,
it. Yeah.
Who knows? But I can remember sitting in that car and just screaming, and I just, you call it a break. I don't know what you call it, but I decided that I was going down the wrong path, and that this was wrong, and I needed to straighten up and fly right, is what my father would have said. And that's what I decided to do. And so I shifted again to this, where I thought, okay, what I need to do is go get married to a good Catholic girl, because I'm Catholic and my family expects that. And and get a good job and, have 2.1 children. I just decided that's what I needed to do. That was the correct, that all this other mental stuff was an aberration and I shouldn't do it. And that was what was going to kill me,
Yeah.
So I decided, the alpha male was the way to go. And, I could do that. And so I was driven to lead and to innovate and to work really hard and play that role. And also, be the role of the husband and father. And, and honestly, that's my biggest regret in life is that I don't know. You can always look back and say, you wish you'd done it differently. But I should have said something. I mean, my poor wife had no idea.
Right.
And so it was not fair at all to her. So I have a lot of regret that I did that. But I hid myself. So at that time, and I realized I was not gay, but I was a woman. And I didn't even really want to accept it. It was like, that's what I kind of came to, but, no, I'm not going to do that. There's no way. I cannot.
Especially, this is what year?
This was 1970s. No, sorry. This would be 1982,
Okay.
83.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, and I just thought there's no possible way. So I spent, my whole career in engineering, doing all these great things and having a great time from that perspective, but also running from that. And there were very few outlets that were safe because I could let no one. And so no one at that point knew.
Just you.
Just me. And so it was like this inner turmoil of, I don't want to go into too much detail on all that, but it was really hard. And it took a toll on me. Yeah.
Do you think it impacted the way you were a manager and a leader at that time?
Yeah, I guess that was your question, and I totally forgot.
But
Thank you.
This is perfect.
Thank you for the redirect. Yeah, it did. I had this idea of what a manager would do and how I should lead, and that worked okay. But I really think as I sort of absorbed from the people I worked for this concept we've talked about hiring good people and enabling them and letting them go do it, and then and that I had some strengths to bring to the party too, and we could all succeed that way. I was never the boss that went around saying, hey, it's 6 o'clock, how come you're packing up,
Right.
You need to, that was just not the way we worked or I worked. It was people wanted to, so I saw it as a need to set a vision of where we wanted to go technically and to be able to communicate that to people and to also communicate it upwards as well as downwards. Mm-hmm. And I really think at the end of the day, I call myself a technologist, but I had all these brilliant people who worked for me, so it was.
So we'll just call you badass leader.
Okay.
We'll put it at that.
But what I found was my superpower, I think, was to be able to translate, to be able to speak to the engineers and scientists and coders and understand what their issues were, what was going on, where the bottlenecks were, be able to speak their language, speak the mathematics of this really difficult communications processes we were doing and inventing, and then go speak to marketing and sales and customers and
that
the CEO.
Is so special.
I didn't think so. But I think that's my real advantage was I was able to do that. So I think that I sort of led by not knowing how to lead. I just sort of did that. But I think also I was very closed. And so I don't know if this helped or not. I never made good, I shouldn't say never, but it was difficult for me to have friends in the office. I didn't really relate to people. I wasn't the person who you invited out for a beer. I just was cold and closed. I mean, and that was, I think, the effect you were getting at.
Yeah.
I had this persona, and I could never let one bleed into the other. So the best thing for me to do was to just be aloof. I don't know, just distant. And So I had very few friends. Not people didn't try. I mean, honestly, people were, friendly, but I just never could connect. And that was because I guess because it was all an act. I was pretending to be something I was not. But when I transitioned years later, that all shifted. It totally shifted. And I think I was a better team player and manager and leader once I was aware of and could be myself.
Which I think that's so powerful. So what year was it that you transitioned, and what can you think of what led up? I think we talked about this before, but what led up to gave you the courage to be able to be your authentic self?
Well, I was totally non-courageous, and I was convinced I could not, and that I would never, and that I just had to hide. But then in the 2000s, I guess, there were communities that were formed, and the internet allowed you to connect. And so,
The internet you're a big part of.
There you go. For better or for worse, I remember someone blaming me for porn because that was a big driver of internet technology.
Yeah,
and I thought, well, I guess you're kind of right. So it was in the 2000s so then I had some people that I had met and connected with in some ways through this shared burden or problem, and I had some friends who were not actually part of that community but encouraged me to figure it out and that it was okay to be yourself. But I was still lying to my family. I was still keeping it all. So to me, no one knew outside of the kind of this newfound community. But I couldn't tell, and so much happened in the 2000s to me. All four of our grandparents, my wife and my parents, they all died within like 2 years.
Oh, wow.
Of one another.
I'm so sorry.
Well, thank you. But they were World War II era, the greatest generation, and they were all gone. And that was a huge thing. And I had to take over from my parents the responsibility for my younger brother, who was very mentally challenged, very mentally ill. Yeah. And my father's dying command to me was, you cannot let Bill end up on the street. Yeah. You have to do something. And we came up with ways to try to approach that, but I had all this stuff going on, and I just knew I could never tell. And this was just the thing I had to carry around with me forever, and I just couldn't do it. And so, no, I wasn't courageous. I was just convinced that I couldn't do it. But it ended up getting too much, and I nearly succeeded in giving it all up. I not proud of it, but I gave up. And then it was just the pressure, just from all. I just could not see a way out, and I didn't call for help. But anyway, I ended up surviving, and. I guess at that point I thought, well, if that didn't kill me, I guess I can. And also the cat was sort of out of the bag because my wife knew something was terribly, terribly wrong. Right. And so we talked about it. And then in true to form, we both totally ignored it for like 2 years. We just, it was okay. This is what I'm dealing with. Great. How was work? I want another cup of coffee, and we went about our lives. But eventually, we started talking. We went to counseling, and we tried for like 8 years. Wow. And I had agreed not to transition. Yeah. That's what I felt like. I was still struggling with. Can I do it? Should I do it? But I had agreed not to. But eventually, we decided that. She decided she needed to divorce me, and I thought, well, if you're going to divorce me, I'm going to transition. Right. So I did, beginning in, I guess, 2017, I guess. Okay.
Which is not that long ago.
No, but honestly, since all that came out with her in 2010, I guess, so the ensuing 7 years, the way we compromised was I would not transition, but I would try to, with her understanding and blessing, as much as she was, it was hard for her, but, to allow me to try to go connect with groups and people and have outlets to maybe that would allow me to live.
Right.
And so I was already sort of figuring out some of it, but I didn't start really transitioning through medically and socially until 2017, 2018. Yeah.
Yeah. So what would you say? Well, you were going to say something. What would you say then? Because I can picture you. I love that it's storming outside right now, so I hope we don't lose power. But I can picture you're a very successful alpha male in a technology world surrounded by a lot of men. And then where were you working at in 2017 when this happened? Had you already started consulting?
I had left Broadcom in 2008 and started consulting.
Okay.
So I consulted with a number of the cable companies, Comcast in particular. And then I started to do expert witness work.
Let's talk about the expert witness work.
Okay, yeah.
Because I think that is so cool. So tell us a little bit about that.
Well, I got into it sort of backwards, and then I had this consulting thing, but this lawyer came looking for the male me because one of my patents was involved in this big lawsuit. And I don't know, your listeners may not know, but like when you work for a company like Broadcom and you get all these patents, I had 100 and something patents, they all belong to Broadcom. They don't belong to me.
Right.
I'm the inventor, in almost all of my patents, I was one of the named inventors. Right. So be clear, it was a lot of these brilliant people. But whatever, I didn't own them. Broadcom did. So, they were like children that were off doing their thing. I didn't know what was going on. But someone came, it was part of what was now called DOCSIS 3.0 or channel bonding for cable modems, which was a big step that was taken later after the initial cable modems were out and we were making money and it was growing and people were getting them at their homes like you. We wanted to increase the capacity. And so we started bonding channels together and getting a statistical multiplexing gain mathematically by having multiple channels, primarily because packet sizes are variable inside the internet protocol. Yeah. And that variability and the distribution of the different sizes allowed you to get this statistical advantage by bonding. And so I have a couple patents in that area and had done a lot of simulation work. And so this lawyer was hired by the cable companies who were being sued over using this patent, along with others, by I think I'm still under NDA about it. So let me just say it was by someone else thought that their patent applied to this, and they were suing these people. So they came looking for me because they did their cursory search. My name popped up, right. And so they came looking for me. And I can remember talking to this guy in the parking lot, and I said, well, I first took the call, and he asked for my dead name, and I said, yes, and on the phone. And anyway, so I said to him, well, before we go any further, I've transitioned, and this is the deal, and I'm sorry, but if that's going to be a problem, then. And he goes, well, I don't know. Let me think about it. And we hung up. And I thought, well, that's the end of that. And 3 months later, he calls me back up and he goes, are you still transitioned? And I said, yes. And you're not going to untransition, right? I said, no. And he said, well, fine. Then, and I got hired to work as an expert, which made sense because, it's hard to not be expert in a patent that you did.
You did, right.
So they felt like that would be strong. And it was. It was a lot of fun. And I got to do that. Although the first deposition was pretty rough because they were like, now wait a minute, this isn't your name. How come it says, and the people had to shut it all down. I think we've established Miss Quigley's identity. We don't need to belabor this point. So they gave it up, but it was actually kind of tough. So I have to give the law firm and the partner, especially who I guess believed in me, who gave me that opportunity, even though I'm sure he took flack for it, and we had some troubles, initially, but he gave me, he was a great friend and leader, and gave me that opportunity to redefine myself. And that allowed me then, because I was back in I was still in the cable industry.
Right.
I had taken a break to transition because it's horrible. It's
Right.
the hardest thing I've ever had to do. And it's ugly and awkward and you just don't want anyone to see you. And so I had kind of pulled back from everything. And, I was involved in the community, and I dropped off the electrical and computer engineering board because I wasn't ready.
Right.
But getting back into consulting and doing this enabled me, or gave me the courage to go. I went back to the College of Engineering board and said, "Hey, if you still want me, I'd love to participate." And we made it was. And I went back on other community boards. I didn't want to give up my life. I wanted to live my life.
And kudos to another great leader that we both love. Raheem was amazing.
Oh, he was amazing. We had this whole, it was kind of funny. We had this whole scheme about how I was going to be off to the side and he was going to introduce me when we had everybody gathered at this. And it turns out we all flew on the same plane to the same meeting. So I'd run into all these people in the Delta Lounge before we flew to Panama. And, so I'd already reconnected with all these people who had already heard, because there was a rumor mill within the engineering community. So it wasn't as gosh awful as I feared it would be. But they were totally great, and Raheem was just fantastic. I mean, he didn't bat an eye. It was like, well, of course we'll figure that out. Just of course. So yeah, he was tremendous.
Yeah,
and the people on the board too. Because I'm pretty sure I was the first living, breathing trans woman that anybody had seen, or maybe not, but certainly on the board and in most of the circles
at a prestigious university.
Exactly. And I have to say, those friends and acquaintances stuck with me. Right, Raheem did. I think I lost every other friend. Friends I'd known. I was never a great friend maker, but in the aftermath of the divorce and transition, people it really tells you who your friends are.
Yep.
So a lot of those people abandoned me, but Georgia Tech did not. So.
Which, I could get teary-eyed on that. With one of the things I want to say about Raheem, and this is Raheem Baya, who's now the Dean of Engineering at Georgia Tech, and I remember earlier this year with the changes happening in the government and him doing town halls. And I remember sitting and just watching him with so much grace in a town hall meeting. And a fellow, like a faculty member, had a question dealing with gender identity things. And just watching him and his compassionate response and seeing him get teary-eyed and just saying, like, we're going to take care of the people. And I think that's, we at the AGN group and this podcast, we're all about getting to know humans as humans and loving people for who they are and allowing them. I mean, the whole thing about Be Brave, Be Badass is that we personally believe that everyone has their own best badass, and it's the best self they can be in that day. And that we really just want to empower people to be brave enough to reach their badass. And the more we figure out ways to educate and create communities and create understanding around these things, to understand that, someone can't be their best self if they can't even be authentically themselves.
No, that's well put. Yeah, it's a big thing. But that's been my slight bit of advocacy. I've not been great at all that, but I've seen it as my role to be visible in the community. And so I serve on the Atlanta Symphony Orchestra board, and they were great. They knew me before.
That's what I was going to ask. Did they know you before?
Yeah, they did. And it was not as easy as Raheem just not even blinking and saying, of course. But it happened. And
because how long had you been a member of the orchestra?
Gosh, I don't know. I guess I've been attending.
Was it singing or playing instruments or both?
Neither. I was not a member of the orchestra. I just have always had a love for classical music and classical singing. And of course, shout out to the Atlanta Symphony Chorus is the finest in the world. Of volunteer choruses, right? The symphony, the musicians, of course, are paid and are world class. But Robert Shaw, one of his legacies was developing this Atlanta Symphony Chorus, and they are not paid. And yet they are world renowned. I mean, they're fantastic. So I would love to be able to sing with them, but I'm not skilled enough.
Yeah.
But no, I started, attending really regularly when, as part of this effort to work together with my ex-wife, we bought a condo in Atlanta. We were living in North Carolina, and we bought a condo on Peachtree Street so I could go to tech meetings and we could walk to the symphony and walk to the Fox.
How nice.
And that was, it was really a good thing. We really enjoyed those years together. So we started, being patrons and about that time. But I had always done it. My brother, who I mentioned earlier, was a music major. He was a classical violist and played.
Now, is this the youngest brother?
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, he extremely talented, almost like a savant. If he hadn't been, I guess the terms you would call today would be bipolar. But he was really bad. He would have full-blown hallucinations and psychotic breaks, and he was in and out of mental institutions his entire life. So, if he hadn't had that going on, he probably would have played but he did play at different times for regional symphonies. And he was extremely talented. And so, I always had a connection, And
you wanted to do music anyways
when
you were in high
I did.
school.
But I never got any lessons. I was the forgotten child, right? He got classical lessons. My older sisters got guitar lessons and ballet and all these things, and they just forgot to enroll me in anything. So I taught myself to play guitar by watching what was the name of that show? King Flower Biscuit Hour or something. It was like a show where they would just show rock bands playing late at night. And they would zoom in on the guitarists, and I would watch their hands and say, oh, I wonder if I can do that. And I learned to play totally by ear.
That is amazing. Yeah.
I mean, I went back and learned.
Right, afterwards.
To read.
Because we were talking about you had a studio at one place where you had a whole bunch of guitars.
Oh,
and
yeah,
you had to...
yeah. Well, and I still do a singer-songwriter thing, and I write a lot of my music, and it get given away because I have guitarist hands. My left hand has to have very short nails, and my right hand, because I play a finger style.
Yeah.
I play with all 5 of my fingers. I have to have them shaped and done. So it's.
You're telling you're a manicurist. No, wait. That has to be this length.
Well,
so that
exactly.
I can do
No, I have. Luckily, I found some people who will work with me, but often they wanted to run screaming because I'd say, no, it needs to have this slope and it needs to be this,
Right.
And this hand, no, I don't want anything on this hand.
I love this.
But that's okay. It was fine.
So it just warms my heart so much that you've been able to get in at this stage in your life. Because you were how old when you transitioned?
Oh, gosh. 55, something like that.
Okay,
50.
okay. So, but at this stage in your life, that you've now been able to continue to do the things that you love to do, but in the way that you want to do them. Like you still advise at Georgia Tech. Mm-hmm. You're still now expert witness on a lot of different things. That was your first expert witness, but
yes,
now you do
true.
it consulting. You get to do the symphony. What are some other things that you feel more comfortable doing now?
Talking to people.
Right?
Yeah. We talked a little bit about how I was very closed. I was not mean. I was not, snooty or aloof, I don't think. But I just didn't connect with people. And so I think of it, I had this experience in the supermarket, right? I would go to the supermarket as a man, and the checkout people just could sense my aura or something. I don't know who knows what they could sense, but they just knew not to talk to me. Here it is, you pay, and fine, you go. And I would say the minimal interaction was
right.
what I went for, because I tried to be polite, but I knew I was just, no one talked to me. But after I transitioned, I don't know why, people want to talk to me, and I talk to everybody. I mean, I know all the checkout ladies at the place where I shop, and the people in the pharmacy, and the people who stock the shelves. I mean, I know all of them. They know me, and it's just a totally different world. I mean, it's totally different.
That's amazing.
And honestly, it was when I finally started taking estrogen at a high enough dose. I like to call it my Paul on the road to Damascus moment. It was like, it got to a certain level in my bloodstream. It took weeks of taking this drug, thinking this is doing nothing. What is going on? And then finally, it was like the skies opened, and all of a sudden the world, like in The Wizard of Oz, went from black and white to color. And this raging noise in my head, which had been there forever, all of a sudden turned off. It was like a whole new world. And I was still fighting it at that point. Okay. I didn't know. I wanted I'm a scientist. I wanted a reason. Why? Right. Why is this? Why would I be like this? What? And of course, there's no good science on it because it's too small. And now we're, anyway, the politics today make it even harder to come up with.
We're just going backwards.
We're going
and trying
backwards.
To learn.
Yeah.
And how does, how do you feel watching what's happening now? Because I know there are a lot of, and as we talked about it, I have a cousin who struggled with gender identity. And one of the things that was interesting to me when I found out about this cousin was then I thought back to childhood and I was like, oh, well, now so much makes sense, right? And she, as a child, had also gone a very masculine route and went over the top masculine and all of these things, and has really struggled with mental health challenges entire, and is I think at this stage is still not transitioned, has gone back and forth and all of that. And I wonder, there's a lot of controversy, and I don't know the answer to it at all, but there's a lot of controversy right now at what age is an individual old enough to be able to make such a significant decision and change in their life. And I just wonder if there are like ways that we can be more encouraging of families along this journey while also maybe allowing, because as you talked about how painful it was and how like all of that. So I'm not framing this question very well, but what are your thoughts on some of those things that are happening right now?
Well, I think that children know, and parents know their children, and those decisions really need to be made with their doctors. And I think there's a lot of misinformation that has been spread. It's not something like, you come home one day from school and say, Mom, I'm really a girl. And they say, great, let's go put you on hormone blockers and let's go do this. No, I mean, it takes quite a bit of time with therapists and the doctors and figuring it out. So it's not like it's like this impulse thing and then, next week, no, I don't think I'm that. I'm going to change. This is something that it's got to be deep. This is what they do when they evaluate the medical professionals. Is it consistent? Is it persistent? Is it, does it survive the difficulty of all this over and above just, like someone picking up a fad and thinking, it's cool to have black nails or something, right? It's very different. And to portray it as this spur of the moment, flip the switch, and today I want to be a girl, that's just disingenuous. It's just not true. So I really think, my opinion for what it's worth, is that, parents, doctors, and should be able to listen to the children and make that decision as a family. And it's like also the group that actually gets the most gender confirmation surgeries in the United States as people under 20 are males who have gynecomastia, right? Oh. They it's like, well, of course we're going to do that because it'll help their self-esteem, and they don't, and why is that? Is it okay for that person to have that surgery, but someone else is not? Plus, precocious puberty has been something in the literature, and people.
What would you define? What is precocious?
It's like if you have like a 7-year-old who starts to show secondary sex characteristics, and that's pretty tough. And so the puberty blockers were developed, I think, to help those children delay the onset of puberty until a more appropriate age. And then they stop taking them and puberty proceeds normally. And so taking that same drug and applying it to a trans child to help hold off the effects of puberty till the age of majority, for instance, to 18 or something, where they can maybe make a decision about more complex medical intervention. But it gives them that choice to not then be affected by the effects of testosterone and estrogen. They are very, very powerful. And once they have transformed you, it's hard to go back. I mean, look at me, it's just hard. It's hard to reverse some of that. And so I think we need to listen to the children and listen to the advice of the professionals and say, is this persistent? Is it consistent? This is not a flash in the pan. And can we delay things? Not do anything permanent, right? They can stop and change at any time. But anyway, I'm getting on soapbox.
No, I love this. My strong opinion is that the world just needs to be more educated about things and stop taking little snippets of information out of context and then running with it in the media and turning it into this wildfire, because I think there are just people being lost in the process of that. And so with that said, one of the things that I've heard is a fear that, and I don't know the science behind this and the hormone endocrinology component of it, but the fear that taking these blockers then would have such significant negative impact on the growth of that child during that phase in different areas, to a point that even if then at 18 they decided, never mind, they still wanted, for example, to be a male, even then upping the testosterone at that stage would never reverse whatever negative impact had by not having that throughout those growth phases. Well,
I do believe the science is not all there. We've not investigated it at all, but we do know that puberty blockers are reversible, and there may be some effects, but the other thing I think is important to point out is that the reason why doctors and parents have gone to these to health interventions for children is because it reduces the suicidality rate, right?
Right.
It's dramatic. Some studies from Europe show a 70% reduction in suicides among this. And
population.
When you don't get it, these kids are very prone. I don't know all the statistics to be accurately quoting them, but it's dramatically higher among trans kids who do not get help.
I know from when I was in residential treatment after my kidnapping, and I was in one program, that's when I first met my first transgender friends, right? And so I'm just all about learning and getting to know people. So I would just thoughtfully, not intrusively, but get to know them. And all of them, including my cousin, they had all attempted suicide. All of them. And thankfully, we're getting thunder now. It's like we're really pushing the levels of power here.
We're not blowing in the microphones. This is thunder. Yeah.
Exactly. But yeah, every single one of them, and thankfully, the people for the most part that I've been in contact with, who are some amazing people, just amazing people, they were not successful, and then they were able to get treatment, and then they were able to start this journey of transitioning at the speed they wanted to, and then at the same point, my one example of a family member who has just been back and forth with that, just seeing that agony is so painful that I'm like, seriously, I would do anything to be able to, in a safe way, help people children just feel heard and understood, and maybe like they had a voice.
Yeah. I think you're right on. I think of it this way. Any kind of medical intervention for anything has trade-offs, right? There are side effects that you manage and you weigh. Is the benefit better than? And so I think of it this way. Do I want to maybe risk some potential hindrance of growth or something? Because again, these drugs have been used and known, and we prescribe them. So it's not like it's experimental. This is
right.
Do I weigh that against the dramatically higher suicide risk? And if I want, so do I want my child to live, or do I want to risk this small risk of what happens if they they decide not to transition. And what I found also in looking at the data is that the biggest reason for people detransitioning or going back and forth, it's not, oh, I'm not sure. It's the social...
Didn't accept me.
You're right. They get pushback and people hate it and they lose their jobs. I mean, there's all kinds of negative societal things that happen to people. Some of the numbers I've seen, even after doing the totally irreversible surgeries like I've done, that are horrendous, the regret rate, and there is regret, right? For some, it's like less than 1%. And you compare that with people who get knee replacement surgeries. Who they need, right? If you don't go get your knee replaced if you don't really need it.
Right.
But the regret rate on knee replacement surgery is like 22%, right? It's like, okay, yeah, some people regret it, but it's not very many compared to all these other surgeries which are, quote, elective.
Right.
I don't know. That makes me mad. I mean, it makes me sad that things have gone. And, it's what's fascinating is this is history repeating itself.
Yes.
In Germany in the 30s, there was an institute for sex change, for sex issues like this. They did all sorts of research on transgender things, and they had this big library. And one of the things that happened in the rise of the Nazis and in the burning of books is they burned this place to the ground. Wow. And they burned all the books, and all the research got lost, and the trans people were one of the ones targeted to be, exterminated. And clearly we're not there today, but there's echoes, and it makes me really concerned.
Well, I'm glad that we can educate the world just by your story.
Yeah.
And share that. I want to ask a couple more questions about, so we talked about your leadership style as a man. Now, can you talk about now the things that you lead? Do you feel like that you lead in a different way? Or do you feel like you're accepted as a leader in a male-dominated industry different now?
I've seen a big difference, both positive and negative. I think because I am much more open and I think emotionally intelligent maybe, and able to interact with people at a better level, I find I can be more collaborative, and that it's, and also being able to relate to people where they are, I think helps lead. I think it helps you lead them if you have some insight and some ability to relate to who they are. But I will say, I used to be the big tech expert, male with the patents and big leader. And when I spoke in meetings, people listened, right? People listened. I did find in some of these, my role as a consultant, that even though they were paying me ridiculous fees to come in and be the expert, I could be sitting in the room and I would state this theory or way to approach the case or idea, and it would just be dismissed. I can remember thinking about this and looking around the room, and it wasn't until one of the men sort of echoed that, did it like, oh, that's a great idea. Let's go do that.
Oh my gosh, I love this example.
But it was fascinating because, it was so clearly, I can remember being in a room and saying, no, this is how this works. And they all go, oh, okay. And you had to learn to be different. I found I had to learn a kind of a different way to influence those kind of meetings.
So tell me what you did, because being a woman my whole life, right, and being a leader and being in rooms and having some great ideas that are completely dismissed, and then actually, I think it was my friend Lisa and I recently talked about this, about how we are as leaders is that if we see that happening in a room, and then we'll pause and say, wait, she just said the exact same thing. Why did we dismiss it because it came out of her, but now it's suddenly a great idea?
Right. Well, what I kind of learned to do was to phrase my, the next time I got the chance, I would phrase my idea as being this other man's idea. I want to build on what Joe is saying. I think he really has a point here. We could do, because these are the reasons that this is such a great idea. And so it brings people in as opposed to, honestly, my style before was, no, listen, I know how this works. This is the way this works. And people would listen. Well, you have to now kind of work on the collaboration by making people accept things and have them have some buy-in. And I don't think that's a bad thing.
I'm actually hearing that, and I think that's great advice for any man or woman or whatnot not to do in a fake way. But I think oftentimes our ideas are building off. And I know myself as a leader, I had this phase when we were building Florence Healthcare, and as I love sometimes being a COO, and then you also have challenges because you're constant context switching. And I found out by peer reviews and stuff, I love feedback. And so I'm like, just tell me the feedback. I got the feedback, and the feedback was, okay, Angela, when you go into a room in just decision mode and I know what to do and whatnot, then you're just a bitch. and you're not bringing other people in, and you're not listening, and you're doing that initial approach.
Yeah.
Like, well, I'm the expert. I know this stuff. This is what we're going to do. Let's do it. Versus, and then after I got that feedback, I was like, well, I don't want to be a bitch, And so I learned to come in and ask more questions. Like, okay, what are your thoughts on this? And then help that. So I think that's a really healthy thing to do, as long as it's not fake, right?
Yeah.
Because then you're getting people that you're all in it together, and it's like this team thing versus this dictatorship approach.
But I think there's a fundamental shift that has to happen, is that if your motivation ultimately is to get credit, it's your idea and you want to be, that makes it hard. But if you're not so worried about who gets the credit, let's just solve the problem, then it's easier to bring other people in and kind of influence things by building on what other people say. And I think that makes teams stronger, and it makes people have more buy-in, as you said. But I think one thing I can't let go, though, is you said, I'd come across as a bitch. Well, if you were a man, you would just be assertive.
Exactly.
Right? I mean, so that sucks.
Yeah.
But, we can't fix that overnight. And I think, it seems like there's progress. And I will say the lawyers and the teams that I work with, sometimes it just took a little time to gain the trust, too, of the group, and that they would, so you could collaborate in ways that were less manipulative, or I don't know, and less dismissive. I came out of some meetings feeling like I had been dismissed. I had to think, well, now wait a minute, I'm the expert. They're paying me to be the expert. Why are they not listening to me?
Right.
And that was frustrating.
Yeah.
But and they learned, I learned, and we all sort of got better at it. So,
I love this.
Yeah.
I love this. Okay, how would you say your idea? So I love conflict, because I believe resolving conflict in a healthy way. And I'm saying I love healthy conflict, and I think so many people are just conflict averse. And so I have this desire. One day I want to write a book on conflict resolution. And so, but I wonder with you, when you now look at, what is your methodology on how you resolve conflict now today in 2025?
I'm one of those conflict averse people, honestly. So I do avoid conflict in terms of interpersonal things, which is a big part of business. And I think that's why I was not the CEO. I was the technologist, because I really don't have a lot of strength there. I do think I'm more collaborative and willing to work to a solution through discussion. But the places where I did have conflict and that I loved was in a technical realm. If we were going to debate the merits of one approach over the other, I'd go on that all day. That's not a problem. In fact, literally, there was a person in the industry, in the cable industry. We initially were partners and worked on some early stuff together, cable modems, from a different company. Broadcom was working with another big networking company, and I got to know this man, just a brilliant man. And so we worked together for a couple of years, and then our strategies and our corporate directions sort of shifted, so we became sort of adversaries. So I spent the whole 2000, the later part of my career in the office of the CTO, writing, doing papers and analysis, and then trying to drive consensus in the industry, which I could do. Technically I could go
Right.
drive that. But it often came down to me and this other person having these big discussions in these forums, at big conferences, and on the panel they'd have us all there, and it became a fight between us. This way versus this way, and how to. But actually, through all of that, we still remained friends. And after I transitioned, I connected with him later, and he was just a brilliant guy. But we fought all across the world at different conferences about the direction of where the cable industry should go. So I don't know. Does that mean
But you still became friends. And I think that's what's powerful. I think that maybe even having people understand that sometimes in certain situations, conflict resolution is also being willing to speak up when you're really an expert in something in a compassionate, maybe not compassionate, but I would say a compassionate way. But then also listen more in some areas where you're not an expert in.
Yeah, I think you're right. I do think one thing that benefited John and I was that we both were willing to look at the other's idea and step back and say, that is actually a better approach.
That's powerful. That right there is powerful.
Well, sometimes I feel like I had to do it more than he did because he was so smart and really quite an expert. But anyway, yeah. So we have DOCSIS 3.0 is like we fought about that for years, but it worked. It worked great. They sold zillions of modems. I mean, so we worked it out, and it has elements of both in it, and there were other people too. It wasn't just John and I. There were other really capable people, and they were coming at it from different perspectives. And I think we ended up with a really good solution.
So going back to the badass leader piece, in your mind, when you think of leaders, what do you think defines a badass leader versus a manager or a leader? What would you say a badass leader is in your perspective?
Well, I would say, just starting from the manager side, management, I think, is the art of juggling all the balls you're given, whether that's paperwork and interfacing with other departments and HR and having to write the reports and do reviews and all. It's critical skills, critical things to do. But I think the difference between a manager and a leader is someone who has the courage or drive to have a vision and to be able to communicate that and to get people to come along with that. And like we just talked about, to adjust that. You have an overall vision, but it doesn't have to be the way you think it's got to be implemented. Like, let's bring people and smart people in, let them come up with the better solution. So I think that's the leader who's able to get the best out of people and to trust them when they say this is the approach. So I don't know. I mean, clearly you need managers. And then there's probably a place for managers who don't have to lead quite so much. But I think in order to really run these sort of innovator groups, you have to be able to let people go with it. And then, so they have buy-in and they feel like at the end of the day, they've contributed. And so you can't be the one who gets all the credit.
I think that the last piece you just said really also then elevates it to the badass leader part as well. It's that if we go back to the part where you were talking about the way you transitioned your communication skills when you were bringing other people along, and you made the comment then that if you're the type of person who wants to get the credit for it, this is not the approach.
Not going to work.
But I think a badass leader in that instance, going back to what you said, is someone who's really interested in solving problems and creating a vision and bringing everyone around, and not the person that's like, I need to get the credit for it.
Yeah, interesting. I think you're right. But also it's easier to feel like you don't have to have the credit if you aren't feeling constantly threatened in your job.
Yes.
And I think so many women especially feel like they have got to be the one who gets the credit because, my God, I'm not going to get it any other way, right? And so I think it's a real dilemma.
Well, I also think there's nothing wrong with taking credit when you should take credit, because sometimes
agreed.
I also
Agreed.
see that women sometimes are afraid to take the credit for something when they should, and then they get bypassed on promotions and all of these types of things
Exactly.
because it's
Exactly.
not. So there's an art. Maybe that's a future book, The Art of When to Take Credit. I love that. Okay, so let's see. There were a couple of other things I wanted to make sure that we covered really quick. Okay, going back to equity, advocacy, and inclusion, those new cuss words that we have in our society today. You've served on multiple boards and advised major institutions we've talked about. What do you think the most powerful thing leadership can do today to build truly inclusive organizations?
You mean sidestepping legal pressure to not do that? Gosh. I think it's looking for talent in more than just the standard place, right? Where where you already have an institution that is, that's not the way to say that. I think today we need to find the best and the brightest and encourage STEM and women and people of color, to get the opportunities to be competitive, and then let them run with it, right? It's not so I think we need to be proactive in building up those skills in those groups and being sure we're not having what's it called? Bias that you don't realize you have.
Unconscious bias.
Unconscious bias. Thank you. We need to be intentional about going to those places and getting those kind of candidates. I do think it's a meritocracy is great, but we need to be aware that diverse opinions, I think, really help at the end of the day.
Yes.
And that whole collaboration piece we've been talking about so much. I think when you have people coming at it from different areas and different backgrounds, and that applies from a technology perspective for sure, but I think it also applies from a socioeconomic and ethnic, and there's a lot of different perspectives in the world, and I think we benefit from having those.
Absolutely.
At the table.
I think that was one of my big takeaways when I was being mentored about my approach to come in and just make a decision. Is I was also like, whatever we built would have probably been good. But the moment I instead drew everyone else in the room and got them to speak up and give ideas, that solution was great. So when you talk about building a world, like maybe we can build some situations and some systems and things that are good. But if we really want to build something great, then we have to have those pieces of the puzzle.
I agree.
I love that. Okay, so can you tell us, if you could go back, what advice would you give your younger self about leadership and courage?
Oh, gosh.
That's a hard question. So many
Find
thoughts.
some courage. I mean, that's what I needed, was some courage to actually speak my truth, and I didn't. So I think I would, I don't know. That's the glib first answer, is go back and say, wake up, do the right thing, tell people, speak to people, let people know what's going on. But honestly, back in those days, I don't know that even could have happened. But I do think in general, that's what I would want to do, is to go back and say, look, be more courageous. Give people the benefit of the doubt to understand. I was just afraid people would not understand, that there was just no way. And I just could not even consider talking about some of the things that were going on in my head. And I think that was wrong. I also should have gone and gotten help from therapists earlier. But I didn't want to tell a therapist. I mean, I didn't want to tell anybody.
You didn't want to say it out loud in your head, let alone. Yeah.
Exactly. So, but I eventually did, thankfully. And, it really helped me.
I think that I've had the opportunity to speak with several parents who've lost their children to suicide. And a resounding comment they often make is, if they could go back and tell themselves something, would be to just remember love first and compassion first, and listen to understand. And I've not personally met someone, and I've met, unfortunately, quite a few of these parents, And not a single one of them says that they're happy they shut down whatever challenge that their child had. Not a single one has said that if they could go back, that they would do that again.
Oh, wow. That's powerful. I mean, for better or for worse, I haven't interacted with a lot of parents who've lost children. I mean, better or for worse, that would always be worse. But I mean, I've not had that experience. I have spoken to some parents who have transgender children, and I can remember these parents. They were in a very conservative church and in a it was very socially difficult. This was also a number of years ago, but they listened to the child, and at first they were like, "This is crazy, no way," but eventually, I remember the mothers telling me, do I want to go through this, or do I want a dead child? When she read the statistics, she said, well, I want my child to live, and this is too high a risk. I have got to do something. And they ended up having to leave their church, and they were shunned from their, but they stuck by their child and listened. And I think that was so powerful.
Yeah.
It's just amazing to see.
I love that. Okay, can you think of any book or podcast or something that's really made a huge impact on your life?
Early on, I read a book by Dr. Earhart. What was her name? Virginia Earhart. And she was a therapist who dealt with transgender patients back. She started doing this years and years and years ago, back before it was cool, right? And she wrote this book, and I'm not going to get the name right, but you could look for Virginia Earhart. But she interviewed the spouses of the trans people and got their perspective and, the effects on them. And I found that to be, a big reason why I was so reluctant to do things until it nearly killed me. But I think it's an important thing to understand the impacts on your family and try to find ways to mitigate that.
I love that. Okay, so first off, how can listeners connect with you if they want to connect with you?
Head Over Heels, I think was the name of it.
Is the name of the book?
I think so.
Head Over Heels. Okay.
Anyway.
Well, the magical Katie will try and find it.
Okay.
And if that's it, she'll put it in the show notes. But she'll try and find it and put it in the show notes.
Also, Jennifer Boylan has written a number of excellent books about her transition. She was a professor at a Northeastern liberal arts college, and she's an excellent writer. And those are well worth reading, I think. But how would they get in touch with me?
Yep.
I think the easiest way is my Gmail account, KathleenQuigley@gmail.com. Awesome. My consulting is Cathleen Quigley at Swiftwater Consulting, LLC, and that works too. But
so we'll include those in the show notes for
be
people that want to be respectful and also get to know and learn and stuff like that. So we will do that. Okay. It's a requirement of this podcast. I hope you remembered your motivational quote. It's a requirement of this podcast that everyone share their favorite motivational quote. Kathleen, what is yours?
My favorite quote is that any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. And that is Arthur C. Clarke, amazingly prescient writer. I mean, he's credited with geosynchronous satellites. I mean, he's just a brilliant man and a fabulous author. But I think that's an incredibly important idea today because of the need for STEM education, right? We are just a hair's breadth away from society falling apart if we lose the ability to fix the things that we rely on, right? Yeah. I mean, that's a dumb way to say that, I guess. But technology is very
I think
advanced.
That's great. I think the fear of losing basic research and some of the stuff that are
Absolutely.
at threat today,
yes.
Not understanding how those basic research things then go into, like one of the examples I can think of, are you familiar with I think it's called the honeybee algorithm?
Maybe.
So I wondered if you would be familiar with it because it is, Thomas Seeley and several of these people who've spent their whole life focused on honeybees and their foraging behaviors. And so then he worked with some people at Georgia Tech, and they ended up getting a Golden Goose Award.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And it was for this algorithm, and they use it in networking, computer networking, because they use the way that honeybees do foraging and communicate with foraging. And for listeners, if I don't get this perfectly right, you can still Google it and get the full thing. But this is and so also when you think about those types of, society right now, I cringe when I hear the news and hear what people think about basic research, and this is stupid and da-da-da-da. And it's like, okay, you don't understand how these basic building blocks build into something that's magical.
Yeah. Well, I also think we're at a sort of a place in our society where we don't value science and math and people who excel in that. We value athletes and we value fashion influencers, and those are great. And I love athletics and fashion too. But we need to value the people who find math as their thing, and calling them nerds and that doesn't help anybody. But I do think that this applies to other areas too. I think part of our problem in our democracy is that our founding fathers were very firm on this. We needed an educated populace who knew what democracy is, how it works, how it's supposed to function, what are your rights, how does the government that we have today work? If you don't know those things, it's very easy for someone to tell you it's different. You don't know. And
Right.
So I think we need to be sure we educate our kids on civics, and so that they know that there are three branches of government. They are co-equal. They all are purposefully set to balance the power between, so there isn't a king or there isn't,
A dictator.
Yeah, a dictator. And I fear that we don't have enough of that knowledge.
So let's see. So some summaries are A, we believe in basic research. We believe in STEM. We believe in encouraging people from all walks of life and ethnicities and areas and everything you can imagine to participate in STEM and to fund it. And we believe in having healthy conflict about speaking for ourselves, about bringing other people in and not being too worried all the time about getting the credit. But I think, one of the other things I was thinking about the credit piece is a badass leader too then turns around and makes sure that the correct person gets the credit that should.
That's great.
And I think that's really important. So we've talked about that. We've talked about putting love first and getting to know humans first. And when you can be your authentic self, you can have fun conversations at the grocery store, and you can meet people, and you can figure out the friends that are really the true friends that are going to have an impact on your life. Yeah. So we'd encourage people to also learn how to do all of those things and be those true things, because my life is so much better the more people that I learn from different backgrounds and I hear of different stories. That is the thing that I love. This is not my podcast, it's Katie's my podcast. We are joint in this, and I just get the pleasure of talking to amazing people, and it's my joy because I learn something every single time. So thank you for bringing the badass into this podcast. I am very grateful.
Well, thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely.
This is great.
Thanks for joining me for today's episode of the Badass Leaders Podcast. To hear more interviews with industry experts and learn how to grow your career and leadership potential, be sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications to ensure you do not miss future episodes. This podcast is a production of the AGN Group. To learn more about the AGN Group, visit our website at theagnGroup.com. There, you can discover more about our services, which include hosting workshops, management consulting, brand strategy, keynote speaking, and more. Follow us on all social media channels shown on the screen and displayed in the show notes. And until next week, be brave and be badass.